It bears the standard of House Baenri, Zack called up after he had moved closer. He and Maya opened the large gates, and the disc slipped in, showing no hostile movements. Baenri, Breeza repeated over her shoulder, down the house's corridor to where Matron Malice and Risen waited. It seems that you are requested an audience, Matron Mother, Dini put in nervously. Malice moved out to the balcony, and her husband obediently followed. Do they know of our attack? Breeza asked in a silent code, and every member of House Do'Urden, noble and commoner alike, shared that unpleasant thought. House DeVere had been eliminated only a few days before, and a calling card from the first matron mother of Menzo Baranzon could hardly be viewed as a coincidence. Every house knows, Malice replied aloud, not believing the silence to be a necessary precaution within the boundaries of her own complex. Is the evidence against us so overwhelming that the ruling council will be forced to action? She stared hard at Breeza, her dark eyes alternating between the red glow of information and the deep green they showed in the aura of normal light. That is the question we must ask. Malice stepped up onto the balcony, but Breeza grabbed the back of her heavy black robe to stay her. You do not mean to go with the thing? Breeza asked. Malice's answering look showed even more startlement. Of course, she replied. Matron Baenri would not openly call upon me if she meant me harm. Even her power is not so great that she can ignore the tenets of the city. You are certain that you will be safe? Risen asked, truly concerned. If Malice was killed, Breeza would take over the house, and Risen doubted that the eldest daughter would want any male by her side. Even if the vicious female did desire a patron, Risen would not want to be the one in that position. He was not Breeza's father, was not even as old as Breeza.
How's your night going,
Clearly,
Fire?
the present
No
patron
Conan
of the house
yet,
had a lot at stake in Matron Malice's
soon as,
continued good health.
As soon as I get
Your
the funds for
concern
it,
touches
get the
me,
book.
Malice
It's,
replied, knowing her
all the
husband's
ones that he
true
did.
fears. She pulled out of Breeza's grasp and stepped off the railing, straightening her robes as she slowly descended. Breeza shook her head disdainfully and motioned Risen to follow her back inside the house, not thinking it wise that the bulk of the family be so exposed to unfriendly eyes. Do you want an escort? Zack asked, as Malice sat on the disc. I am certain that I will find one as soon as I am beyond the perimeter of our compound, Malice replied. Matron Baenri would not risk exposing me to any danger while I am in the care of her house. Agreed, said Zack. But do you want an escort from House Do'Urden? If one was wanted, 2 discs would have floated in, Malice said in a tone of finality. The matron was beginning to find the concerns of those around her stifling. She was the matron mother, after all, the strongest, the oldest, and the wisest, and did not appreciate others second-guessing her. To the disc, Malice said, Execute your appointed task, and let us be done with it. Zack nearly snickered at Malice's choice of words. Matron Malice Do'Urden, came a magical voice from the disc. Matron Baenri offers her greetings. Too long has it been since last you two have sat in audience. Never, Malice signaled to Zack. Then take me to House Baenri, Malice demanded. I do not wish to waste my time conversing with a magical mouth. Apparently, Matron Baenri had anticipated Malice's impatience, for without another word, the disc floated back out of the Do'Urden compound.
Not going too bad. I can't complain
Zack
too
shut
much.
the gate as it left, then quickly signaled his soldiers into motion. Malice did not want any open company, but the Do'Urden spy network would covertly track every movement of the Baenri sled to the very gates of the ruling house's grand compound. Malice's guess about an escort was correct. As soon as the disc swept down from the pathway to the Do'Urden compound, 20 soldiers of House Baenri, all female, moved out from concealment along the sides of the boulevard. They formed a defensive diamond around the guest matron mother. The guard at each point of the formation wore black robes and blazoned on the back with a large purple and red spider design, the robes of a high priestess. Baenri's own daughters, Malice mused. for only the daughters of a noble could attain such a rank. How careful the first matron mother had been to ensure Malice's safety on the trip. Slaves and drow commoners tripped over themselves in a frantic effort to get far out of the way of the approaching entourage as the group made its way through the curving streets toward the Mushroom Grove. The soldiers of House Baenri alone wore their house insignia in open view, and no one wanted to invoke the anger of Matron Baenri in any way. Malice just rolled her eyes in disbelief and hoped that she might know such power before she died. She rolled her eyes again a few minutes later, when the group approached the ruling house. House Baenri encompassed 20 tall and majestic stalagmites, all interconnected with gracefully sweeping and arching bridges and parapets. Magic and fairy fire glowed from 1,000 separate sculptures, and 100 regally adorned guardsmen paced about in perfect formations. Even more striking were the inverse structures, the 30 smaller stalactites of House Baenri. They hung down from the ceiling of the cavern, their roots lost in the high darkness. Some of them connected tip to tip with the stalagmite mounds, while others hung freely like poised spears. Ringing balconies, curving up like the edging of a screw, had been built along the length of all of these, glowing with an overabundance of magic and highlighted design. Magic, too, was the fence that connected the bases of the outer stalagmites, encircling the whole of the compound. It was a giant web, silver against the general blue of the rest of the outer compound. Some said it had been a gift from Lolth herself, with iron-strong strands as thick as a drow elf's arm. Anything touching Baenri's fence, even the sharpest of drow weapons, would simply stick fast until the matron mother willed the fence to let it free. Malice and her escorts moved straight toward a symmetrical and circular section of this fence, between the tallest of the outer towers. As they neared, the gate spiraled and wound out, leaving a gap large enough for the caravan to step through. Malice sat through it all, trying to appear unimpressed. Hundreds of curious soldiers watched the procession as it made its way to the central structure of House Baenri, the great purple-glowing chapel dome. The common soldiers left the entourage, leaving only the 4 high priestesses to escort Matron Malice inside. The sight beyond the great doors to the chapel did not disappoint her. A central altar dominated the place, with a row of benches spiraling out in several dozen circuits to the perimeter of the great hall. 2,000 drow could sit there with room to stretch. Statues and idols, too numerous to count, stood all over the place, glowing in a quiet black light. In the air high above the altar loomed a gigantic glowing image, a red and black illusion that slowly and continually shifted between the forms of a spider and a beautiful drow female. "A work of Gromth, my principal wizard," Matron Baenri explained from her perch on the altar, guessing that Malice, like everyone else who ever came to Chapel Baenri, was awestruck by the sight. "Even wizards have their place." "As long as they remember their place," Malice replied, slipping down from the now stationary disc. "Agreed," said Matron Baenri. "Males can get so presumptuous at times, especially wizards. Still, I wish that I had Gromth at my side more often these days. He has been appointed Archmage of Menzel Baranzon, you know, and seems always at work on Narvandale or some other such tasks." Malice just nodded and held her tongue. Of course, she knew that Baenri's son was the city's chief wizard. Everybody knew. Everybody knew, too, that Baenri's daughter, Triel, was the matron mistress of the academy, a position of honor in Menzel Baranzon, second only to the title of matron mother of an individual family. Malice had little doubt that Matron Baenri would somehow work that fact into the conversation before too long. Before Malice took a step toward the stairs to the altar, her newest escort stepped out from the shadows. Malice scowled openly when she saw the thing, a creature known as an illithid, a mind flayer. It stood about 6 feet tall, fully a foot taller than Malice, most of the difference being the result of the creature's enormous head. Glistening with slime, the head resembled an octopus with pupilless, milky white eyes. Malice composed herself quickly. Mind flayers were not unknown in Menzel Baranzon, and rumors said that one had befriended Matron Baenri. These creatures, though, more intelligent and more evil than even the drow, almost always inspired shudders of revulsion. You
Yeah,
may call
cheers.
him Methil, Matron Bayenri explained. His true
About
name
to
is beyond my
Throw
pronunciation.
some roach weed
He
up
is a
again.
fact. Before Malice could reply, Bayenri added, "Of course, Methil gives me the advantage in our discussion, and you are not accustomed to illithids." Then, as Malice's mouth drooped open in disbelief, Matron Bayenri dismissed the illithid. "You read my thought," Malice protested. Few could insinuate themselves through the mental barriers of a high priestess well enough to read her thoughts, and the practice was a crime of the highest order in Drow society. "No," Matron Bayenri explained, immediately on the defensive. "Your pardon, Matron Malice. Methil reads thoughts, even the thoughts of a high priestess, as easily as you or I hear words. He communicates telepathically. On my word, I did not even realize that you had not yet spoken your thoughts." Malice waited to watch the creature depart the great hall, then walked up the steps to the altar. In spite of her efforts against the action, she could not help peeking up at the transforming spider and drow image every now and then. "How fares House Do'Urden?" Matron Bayenri asked, feigning politeness. "Well enough," replied Malice, more interested at that moment in studying her counterpart than in conversing. They were alone atop the altar, though no doubt a dozen or so clerics wandered through the shadows of the great hall, keeping a watchful eye on the situation. Malice had all that she could handle in hiding her contempt for Matron Bayenri. Malice was old, nearly 500, but Matron Bayenri was ancient. Her eyes had seen the rise and fall of a millennium by some accounts, though Drow rarely lived past their 7th, and certainly not their 8th century. While Drow normally did not show their age, Malice was as beautiful and vibrant now as she had been on her 100th birthday. Matron Bayenri was withered and worn. The wrinkles surrounding her mouth resembled a spider's web, and she could hardly keep the heavy lids of her eyes from dropping altogether. Matron Bayenri should be dead, Malice noted, but still she lives. Matron Bayenri, seeming so beyond her time of life, was pregnant, and due in only a few 10 days. In this aspect, too, Matron Bayenri defied the norm of the Dark Elves. She had given birth 20 times, twice as often as any others in Menzoberranzan, and 15 of those she bore were female, every one a high priestess. 10 of Bayenri's children were older than Malice. "How many soldiers do you now command?" Matron Bayenri asked, leaning closer to show her interest. 300, Malice replied. "Oh," mused the withered old drow, pursing a finger to her lips. "I had heard the count at 350. Malice grimaced in spite of herself. Bayenri was teasing her, referring to the soldiers House Do'Urden had added in its raid on House Devere. 300, Malice said again. "Of course," replied Bayenri, resting back. "And House Bayenri holds 1,000? Malice asked, for no better reason than to keep herself on even terms in the discussion. "That has been our number for many years." Malice wondered again why this old, decrepit thing was still alive. Surely more than one of Bayenri's daughters aspired to the position of matron mother. Why hadn't they conspired and finished Matron Bayenri off? Or why hadn't any of them, some in the later stages of life, struck out on their own to form separate houses, as was the norm for noble daughters when they passed their 5th century? While they lived under Matron Bayenri's rule, their children would not even be considered nobles, but would be relegated to the ranks of the commoners. "You have heard of the fate of House Devere?" Matron Bayenri asked directly, growing as tired of the hesitant small talk as her counterpart. "Of what house?" Malice asked pointedly. At this time, there was no such thing as House Devere in Menzoberranzan. To Drow reckoning, the house no longer existed. The house never existed. Matron Bayenri cackled. "Of course," she replied. "You are matron mother of the 9th house now. That is quite an honor." Malice nodded. but not as great an honor as matron mother of the 8th house. Yes, agreed Anne, but 9th is only one position away from a seat on the ruling council. That would be an honor indeed, Malice replied. She was beginning to understand that Henry was not simply teasing her, but was congratulating her as well, and prodding her on to greater glories. Malice brightened at the thought. Henry was in the highest favor of the Spider Queen. If she was pleased with House de Werden's ascension, then so was Lolth. Not as much of an honor as you would believe, said Bain. We are a group of meddling old females, gathering every so often to find new ways to put our hands into places they do not belong. The city recognizes your rule. Does it have a choice? Henry murmured. Still, drow business is better left to the matron mothers of the individual houses. Lolth would not stand for a presiding council exacting anything that even remotely resembled total rule. Do you not believe that House Baenri would have conquered all of Menzo Baronzon long ago, if that was the Spider Queen's will? Malice shifted proudly in her chair, appalled by such arrogant words. Not now, of course, Matron Baenri explained. The city is too large for such an action in this age. But long ago, before you were even born, House Baenri would not have found such a conquest difficult. But that is not our way. Lolth encourages diversity. She is pleased that houses stand to balance each other, ready to fight beside each other in times of common need. She paused a moment and let a smile appear on her wrinkled lips, and ready to pounce upon any that fall out of her favor. Another direct reference to House de Vere, Alice noted, this time directly connected to the Spider Queen's pleasure. Malice eased out of her angry posture and found the rest of her discussion, fully 2 hours long, with Matron Baenri, quite enjoyable. Still, when she was back on the disc and floating out through the compound, past the grandest and strongest house in all of Menzo Baronzon, Malice was not smiling. In the face of such an open display of power, she could not forget that Matron Baenri's purpose in summoning her had been twofold: to privately and cryptically congratulate her on her perfect coup, and to vividly remind her not to get too ambitious. 5. Weaning. For 5 long years, Lierna devoted almost every waking moment to the care of baby Drizzt. In Drow society, this was not so much a nurturing time as an indoctrinating time. The child had to learn basic motor and language skills, as did children of all the intelligent races. But a Drow elf also had to be grilled on the precepts that bound the chaotic society together. In the case of a male child, such as Drizzt, Lierna spent hour after endless hour reminding him that he was inferior to the Drow females. Since almost all of this portion of Drizzt's life was spent in the family chapel, he encountered no males except during times of communal worship. Even when all in the house gathered for the unholy ceremonies, Drizzt remained silent at Lierna's side, with his gaze obediently on the floor. When Drizzt was old enough to follow commands, Lierna's workload lessened. Still, she spent many hours teaching her younger brother. Presently, they were working on the intricate facial, hand, and body movements of the silent code. Often, though, she just sat Drizzt about the endless task of cleaning the domed chapel. The room was barely a fifth the size of the great hall in House Baenri, but it could hold all the dark elves of House de Werden with 100 seats to spare. Being a wean mother was not so bad now, Lierna thought, but still she wished that she could devote more of her time to her studies. If Matron Malice had appointed Maya to the task of rearing the child, Lierna might already have been ordained as a high priestess. Lierna still had another 5 years in her duties with Drizzt. Maya might attain high priestesshood before her. Lierna dismissed that possibility. She could not afford to worry about such problems. She would finish her tenure as Wean Mother in just a few short years. On or around his 10th birthday, Drizzt would be appointed Page Prince of the family and would serve all the household equally. If her work with Drizzt did not disappoint Matron Malice, Vierna knew that she would get her due. Go up the wall, Vierna instructed. Tend to that statue. She pointed to the sculpture of a naked drow female about 20 feet from the floor. Young Drizzt looked up at it, confused. He couldn't possibly climb up to the sculpture and wipe it clean while holding any secure perch. Drizzt knew the high price of disobedience, though, even of hesitation, and he reached up, searching for his first handhold. Not like that, Vierna scolded. How? Drizzt dared to ask, for he had no idea of what his sister was hinting at. Wheel yourself up to the gargoyle, Vierna explained. Drizzt's small face crinkled in confusion. You are a noble of House Do'Urden, Vierna shouted at him. Or at least you will one day earn that distinction. In your neck purse you possess the emblem of the house, an item of considerable magic. Vierna still wasn't certain if Drizzt was ready for such a task. Levitation was a high manifestation of innate drow magic, certainly more difficult than limning the objects in fairy fire or summoning globes of darkness. The Do'Urden emblem heightened these innate powers of drow elves, magic that usually emerged as a drow matured. Whereas most drow nobles could summon the magical energy to levitate once every day or so, the nobles of House Do'Urden, with their insignia tool, could do so repeatedly. Normally, Vierna would never have tried this on a male child younger than 10, but Drizzt had shown her so much potential in the last couple of years that she saw no harm in the attempt. Just put yourself in line with the statue, she explained, and will yourself to rise. Drizzt looked up at the female carving, then lined his feet just out in front of the thing's angled and delicate face. He put a hand to his collar, trying to attune himself to the emblem. He had sensed before that the magic coin possessed some type of power, but it was only a raw sensation, a child's intuition. Now that Drizzt had some focus and confirmation to his suspicions, he clearly felt the vibrations of magical energy. A series of deep breaths cleared distracting thoughts from the young drow's mind. He blocked out the other sights of the room. All he saw was the statue, the destination. He felt himself grow lighter. His heels went up, and he was on one toe, though he felt no weight upon him. Drizzt looked over at Vierna, his smile wide in amazement. Then he tumbled to a heap. Foolish male, Vierna scolded. Try again. Try 1,000 times if you must. She reached for the snake-headed whip on her belt. If you fail... Drizzt looked away from her, cursing himself. His own elation had caused the spell to falter. He knew that he could do it now, though, and he was not afraid of being beaten. He concentrated again on the sculpture and let the magical energy gather within his body. Vierna, too, knew that Drizzt would eventually succeed. His mind was keen, as sharp as any Vierna had ever known, including those of the other females of House Do'Urden. The child was stubborn, too. Drizzt would not let the magic defeat him. She knew he would stand under the sculpture until he fainted from hunger if need be. Vierna watched him go through a series of small successes and failures, the last one dropping Drizzt from a height of nearly 10 feet. Vierna flinched, wondering if he was seriously hurt. Drizzt, whatever his wounds, did not even cry out, but moved back into position and started concentrating all over again. He is young for that, came a comment from behind Vierna. She turned in her seat to see Briza standing over her, a customary scowl on the older sister's face. Perhaps, Vierna replied. But I'll not know until I let him try. Whip him when he fails, Briza suggested, pulling her cruel six-headed instrument from her belt. She gave the whip a loving look, as if it was some sort of pet, and let a snake's head writhe about her neck and face. Inspiration. Put it away, Vierna retorted. Drizzt is mine to rear, and I need no help from you. You should watch how you speak to a high priestess, Briza warned, and all of the snakeheads, extensions of her thoughts, turned menacingly toward Vierna. As Matron Malice will watch how you interfere with my tasks, Vierna was quick to reply. Briza put her whip away at the mention of Matron Malice. Your tasks, she echoed scornfully. You are too yielding for such a chore. Male children must be disciplined. They must be taught their place. Realizing that Vienna's threat held dire consequences, the older sister turned and left. Vienna let Brisa have the last word. The wean mother looked back to Drizzt, still trying to get up to the statue. Enough, she ordered, recognizing that the child was tiring. He could barely get his feet off the ground. I will do it, Drizzt snapped back at her. Vienna liked his determination, but not the tone of his reply. Perhaps there was some truth to Brisa's words. Vienna snapped the snake-headed whip from her belt. A little inspiration might go a long way. Vienna sat in the chapel the next day, watching Drizzt hard at work polishing the statue of the naked female. He had levitated the full 20 feet in his first attempt this day. Vienna could not help but be disappointed when Drizzt did not look back to her and smile at the success. She saw him now, hovering up in the air, his hands a blur as they worked the brushes. Most vividly of all, though, Vienna saw the scars on her brother's naked back, the legacy of their inspirational discussion. In the infrared spectrum, the whip lines showed clearly, trails of warmth where the insulating layers of skin had been stripped away. Vienna understood the game in beating a child, particularly a male child. Few drow males ever raised a weapon against a female, unless under the order of some other female. How much do we lose? Vienna wondered aloud. What more could one such as Drizzt become? When she heard the words spoken aloud, Vienna quickly brushed the blasphemous thoughts from her mind. She aspired to become a high priestess of the Spider Queen, Lolth the Merciless. Such thoughts were not in accord with the rules of her station. She cast an angry glare on her little brother, transferring her guilt, and again took out her instrument of punishment. She would have to whip Drizzt again this day, for the sacrilegious thoughts he had inspired within her. So the relationship continued for another 5 years, with Drizzt learning the basic lessons of life in Drow society, while endlessly cleaning the chapel of House Do'Urden. Beyond the supremacy of female Drow, a lesson always accentuated by the wicked snake-headed whip, the most compelling lessons were those concerning the surface elves, the Feyries. Evil empires often bound themselves in webs of hate toward fabricated enemies, and none in the history of the world were better at it than the Drow. From the first day they were able to understand the spoken word, Drow children were taught that whatever was wrong in their lives could be blamed on the surface elves. Whenever the fangs of Vienna's whip sliced into Drizzt's back, he cried out for the death of a fairy. Conditioned hatred was rarely a rational emotion.
Well, closest to that I can get right now.
Part 2. The Weapons Master. Empty hours, empty days. I find that I have few memories of that first period of my life, those first 16 years when I labored as a servant. Minutes blended into hours, hours into days, and so on, until the whole of it seemed one long and barren moment. Several times I managed to sneak out onto the balcony of House Do'Urden and look out over the magical lights of Menzoberranzan. On all of those secret journeys, I found myself entranced by the growing and dissipating heat light of Narganda, the time clock pillar. Looking back on that now, on those long hours watching the glow of the wizard's fire slowly walk its way up and down the pillar, I am amazed at the emptiness of my early days. I clearly remember my excitement, tingling excitement, each time I got out of the house and set myself into position to observe the pillar. Such a simple thing it was, yet so fulfilling compared to the rest of my existence. Whenever I hear the crack of a whip, another memory, more a sensation than a memory actually, sends a shiver through my spine. The shocking jolt and the ensuing numbness from those snake-headed weapons is not something that any person would soon forget. They bite under your skin, sending waves of magical energy through your body, waves that make your muscles snap and pull beyond their limits. Yet I was luckier than most. My sister Vienna was near to becoming a high priestess when she was assigned the task of rearing me, and was at a period of her life where she possessed far more energy than such a job required. Perhaps then, there was more to those first 10 years under her care than I now recall. Vienna never showed the intense wickedness of our mother, or more particularly of our oldest sister, Brisa. Perhaps there were good times in the solitude of the house chapel. It is possible that Vienna allowed a more gentle side of herself to show through to her baby brother. Maybe not. Even though I count Vienna as the kindest of my sisters, her words drip in the venom of love as surely as those of any cleric in Menzoberranzan. It seems unlikely that she would risk her aspirations toward high priestesshood for the sake of a mere child, a mere male child. Whether there were indeed joys in those years, obscured in the unrelenting assault of Menzoberranzan's wickedness, or whether that earliest period of my life was even more painful than the years that followed, so painful that my mind hides the memories, I cannot be certain. For all my efforts, I cannot remember them. I have no insight into the next 6 years, but the most prominent recollection of the days I spent serving the court of Matron Malice, aside from the secret trips outside the house, is the image of my own feet. A page prince is never allowed to raise his gaze. Drizzt Do'Urden. 6. Two hands. Drizzt promptly answered the call to his matron mother's side, not needing the whip Brisa used to hurry him along. How often he had felt the sting of that dreaded weapon. Drizzt held no thoughts of revenge against his vicious older sister. With all of the conditioning he had received, he feared the consequences of striking her, or any female, far too much to entertain such notions. "Do you know what this day marks?" Malice asked him as he arrived at the side of her great throne in the chapel's darkened anteroom. "No, matron mother," Drizzt answered, unconsciously keeping his gaze on his toes. A resigned sigh rose in his throat as he noticed the unending view of his own feet. There had to be more to life than black stone and 10 wiggling toes, he thought. He slipped one foot out of his low boot and began doodling on the stone floor. Body heat left discernible tracings in the infrared spectrum, and Drizzt was quick and agile enough to complete simple drawings before the initial lines had cooled. 16 years, Matron Malice said to him. "You have breathed the air of Menzoberranzan for 16 years. An important period of your life has passed." Drizzt did not react, did not see any importance or significance to the declaration. His life was an unending and unchanging routine. One day, 16 years, what difference did it make? If his mother considered important the things he had been put through since his earliest recollections, Drizzt shuddered to think of what the next decades might hold. He had nearly completed his picture of a round-shouldered drow, Brisa, being bitten on the behind by an enormous viper. "Look at me," Matron Malice commanded. Drizzt felt at a loss. His natural tendency once had been to look upon the person with whom he was talking, but Brisa had wasted no time in beating that instinct out of him. The place of a page prince was servitude, and the only eyes of page princes were worthy of meeting were those of the creatures that scurried across the stone floor, except the eyes of a spider, of course. Drizzt had to avert his gaze whenever one of the 8-legged things crawled into his vision. Spiders were too good for the likes of a page prince. "Look at me," Malice said again, her tone hinting at volatile impatience. Drizzt had witnessed the explosions before, a wrath so incredibly vile that it swept aside anything and everything in its path. Even Brisa, so pompous and cruel, ran for hiding when the matron mother grew angry. Drizzt forced his gaze up tentatively, scanning his mother's black robes, using the familiar spider pattern along the garment's back and sides to judge the angle of his gaze. He fully expected, as every inch passed, a smack on his head or a lashing on his back. Brisa was behind him, always with her snake-headed whip near her anxious hand. Then he saw her. the mighty matron Malice Do'Urden, her heat-sensing eyes flashing red and her face cool, not flushed with angry heat. Drizzt kept tense, still expecting a punishing blow. "Your tenure as Page Prince is ended," Malice explained. "You are second boy of House Do'Urden now, and are accorded all the—" Drizzt's gaze unconsciously slipped back to the floor. "Look at me!" his mother screamed in sudden rage. Terrified, Drizzt snapped his gaze back to her face, which now was glowing a hot red. On the edge of his vision, he saw the wavering heat of Malice's swinging hand, though he was not foolish enough to try to dodge the blow. He was on the floor then, the side of his face bruised. Even in the fall, though, Drizzt was alert and wise enough to keep his gaze locked onto that of Matron Malice. "No more a servant," the matron mother roared. "To continue acting like one would bring disgrace to our family." She grabbed Drizzt by the throat and dragged him roughly to his feet. "If you dishonor House Do'Urden," she promised, her face an inch from his, "I will put needles into your purple eyes." Drizzt didn't blink. In the 6 years since Vierna had relinquished care of him, putting him into general servitude to all the family, he had come to know Matron Malice well enough to understand all of the subtle connotations of her threats. She was his mother, or whatever that was worth, but Drizzt did not doubt that she would enjoy sticking needles in his eyes. "This one is different," Vierna said, in more than the shade of his eyes. "In what way, then?" Zaknafein asked, trying to keep his curiosity at a professional level. Zack had always liked Vierna better than the others, but she recently had been ordained a high priestess, and had since become too eager for her own good. Vierna slowed the pace of her gait. The door to the chapel's antechamber was in sight now. "It is hard to say," she admitted. "Drizzt is as intelligent as any male child I have ever known. He could levitate by the age of 5. Yet after he became the Page Prince, it took 10 days of punishment to teach him the duty of keeping his gaze to the floor, as if such a simple act ran unnaturally counter to his constitution." Zaknafein paused, and let Vierna move ahead of him. "Unnatural?" he whispered under his breath. Considering the implications of Vierna's observations, unusual perhaps for a drow, but exactly what Zaknafein would expect, and hope for, from a child of his loins. He moved behind Vierna into the lightless anteroom. Malice, as always, sat in her throne at the head of the spider idol, but all the other chairs in the room had been moved to the walls, even though the entire family was present. This was to be a formal meeting, Zack realized, for only the matron mother was accorded the comfort of a seat. "Matron Malice," Vierna began in her most reverent voice, "I present to you Zaknafein, as you requested." Zack moved up beside Vierna and exchanged nods with Malice, but he was more intent on the youngest Do'Urden, standing naked to the waist at the matron mother's side. Malice held up one hand to silence the others, then motioned for Breeza, holding a house Bawatha, to continue. An expression of elation brightened Drizzt's childish face as Breeza, chanting through the appropriate incantations, placed the magical cloak, black and shot with streaks of purple and red, over his shoulders. "Greetings, Zaknafein Do'Urden," Drizzt said heartily, drawing stunned looks from all in the room. Matron Malice had not granted him privilege to speak. He hadn't even asked her permission. "I am Drizzt, second boy of House Do'Urden, no more the Page Prince. I can look at you now. I mean at your eyes and not your boots. Mother told me so." Drizzt's smile disappeared when he looked up at the burning scowl of Matron Malice. Vierna stood as if turned to stone, her jaw hanging open and her eyes wide in disbelief. Zack, too, was amazed, but in a different manner. He brought a hand up to pinch his lips together, to prevent them from spreading into a smile that would have inevitably erupted into belly-shaking laughter. Zack couldn't remember the last time he had seen the matron mother's face so very bright. Breeza, in her customary position behind Malice, fumbled with her whip, too confounded by her young brother's actions to even know what in the 9 hells she should do. This was a first, Zack knew, for Malice's eldest daughter rarely hesitated when punishment was in order. At the matron's side, but now prudently a step farther away, Drizzt quieted and stood perfectly still, biting down on his bottom lip. Zack could see, though, that the smile remained in the young drow's eyes. Drizzt's informality and disrespect of station had been more than an unconscious slip of the tongue, and more than the innocence of inexperience. The weapons master took a long step forward to deflect the matron mother's attention from Drizzt. "Second boy?" he asked, sounding impressed, both for the sake of Drizzt's swelling pride and to placate and distract Malice. "Then it is time for you to train." Malice let her anger slip away. A rare event. "Only the basics at your hands, Aknafane. If Drizzt is to replace Nalfane, his place at the academy will be in Sorcerer. Thus the bulk of his preparation will fall upon Risen and his knowledge, limited though it may be, of the magical arts." "Are you so certain that wizardry is his lot, matron?" Zack was quick to ask. "He appears intelligent," Malice replied. She shot an angry glare at Drizzt. "At least some of the time. Vienna reported great progress with his command of the innate powers. Our house needs a new wizard." Malice snarled reflexively, reminded of Matron Bayenri's pride in her wizard son, the archmage of the city. It had been 16 years since Malice's meeting with the first matron mother of Menzo Barenzoin, but she had never forgotten even the tiniest detail of that encounter. "Sorcerer seems the natural course." Zack took a flat coin from his neck purse, flipped it into a spin, and snatched it out of the air. "Might we see?" he asked. "As you will," Malice agreed, not surprised at Zack's desire to prove her wrong. Zack placed little value in wizardry, preferring the hilt of a blade to the crystal rod component of a lightning bolt. Zack moved to stand before Drizzt and handed him the coin. "Flip it." Drizzt shrugged, wondering what this vague conversation between his mother and the weapons master was all about. Until now, he had heard nothing of any future profession being planned for him, or of this place called Sorcerer. With a consenting shrug of his shoulders, he slid the coin onto his curled index finger and snapped it into the air with his thumb, easily catching it. He then held it back out to Zack and gave the weapons master a confused look, as if to ask what was so important about such an easy task. Instead of taking the coin, the weapons master pulled another from his neck purse. "Try both hands," he said to Drizzt, handing it to him. Drizzt shrugged again, and in one easy motion put the coins up and caught them. Zack turned an eye on Matron Malice. Any drow could have performed that feat, but the ease with which this one executed the catch was a pleasure to observe. Keeping a sly eye on the matron, Zack produced 2 more coins. "Stack 2 on each hand and send all 4 up together," he instructed Drizzt. 4 coins went up. 4 coins were caught. The only parts of Drizzt's body that had even flinched were his arms. "2 hands," Zack said to Malice. "This one is a fighter. He belongs in Melee MacVeer." "I have seen wizards perform such feats," Malice retorted, not pleased by the look of satisfaction on the troublesome weapons master's face. Zack once had been Malice's proclaimed husband, and quite often since that distant time she took him as her lover. His skills and agility were not confined to the use of weapons. But along with the pleasures that Aknafane gave to Malice, sensual skills that had prompted Malice to spare Zack's life on more than a dozen occasions, came a multitude of headaches. He was the finest weapons master in Menzo Barenzoin, another fact that Malice could not ignore. But his disdain, even contempt for the Spider Queen, had often landed House Do'Urden into trouble. Zack handed 2 more coins to Drizzt. Now enjoying the game, Drizzt put them into motion. 6 went up, 6 came down, the correct 3 landing in each hand. "2 hands," Zack said more emphatically. Matron Malice motioned for him to continue, unable to deny the grace of her youngest son's display. "Could you do it again?" Zack asked Drizzt. With each hand working independently, Drizzt soon had the coin stacked atop his index fingers, ready to flip. Zack stopped him there and pulled out 4 more coins, building each of the piles 5 high. Zack paused a moment to study the concentration of the young drow. and also to keep his hands over the coins and ensure that they were brightened enough by the warmth of his body heat for Drizzt to properly see them in their flight. "Catch them all, second boy," he said in all seriousness. "Catch them all, or you will land in Sorcere, the school of magic. That is not where you belong." Drizzt still had only a vague idea of what Zack was talking about, but he could tell from the weapons master's intensity that it must be important. He took a deep breath to steady himself, then snapped the coins up. He sorted their glow quickly, discerning each individual item. The first two fell easily into his hands, but Drizzt saw that the scattering pattern of the rest would not drop them so readily in line. Drizzt exploded into action, spinning a complete circle, his hands an indecipherable blur of motion. Then he straightened suddenly and stood before Zack. His hands were in fists at his sides, and a grim look lay on his face. Zack and Matron Malice exchanged glances, neither quite sure of what had happened. Drizzt held his fists out to Zack, and slowly opened them, a confident smile widening across his childish face. 5 coins in each hand. Zack blew a silent whistle. It had taken him, the weapons master of the house, a dozen tries to complete that maneuver with 10 coins. He walked over to Matron Malice. 2 hands, he said a third time. He is a fighter, and I am out of coins. How many could he do? Malice breathed, obviously impressed in spite of herself. How many could we stack? Zack Nafane shot back with a triumphant smile. Matron Malice chuckled out loud and shook her head. She had wanted Drizzt to replace Nalfane as the house wizard, but her stubborn weapons master had, as always, deflected her course. Very well, Zack Nafane, she said, admitting her defeat. The second boy is a fighter. Zack nodded and started back to Drizzt. Perhaps one day soon to be the weapons master of House Do'Urden, Matron Malice added to Zack's back. Her sarcasm stopped Zack short, and he eyed her over his shoulder. With this one, Matron Malice continued wryly, wrenching back the upper hand with her usual lack of shame. Could we expect anything less? Rizzy, the present patron of the family, shifted uncomfortably. He knew, and so did everyone, even the slaves of House Do'Urden, that Drizzt was not his child. 3 rooms? Drizzt asked, when he and Zack entered the large training hall at the southernmost end of the Do'Urden complex. Balls of multicolored magical light had been spaced along the length of the high-ceilinged stone room, basking the entirety in a comfortably dim glow. The hall had only 3 doors, one to the east, which led to an outer chamber that opened onto the balcony of the house, one directly across from Drizzt, on the south wall, leading into the last room in the house, and the one from the main hallway that they had just passed through. Drizzt knew from the many locks Zack was now fastening behind them that he wouldn't often be going back that way. 1 room, Zack corrected. But 2 more doors, Drizzt reasoned, looking out across the room, with no locks. Ah, Zack corrected. Their locks are made of common sense. Drizzt was beginning to get the picture. That door, Zack continued, pointing to the south, opens into my private chambers. You do not ever want me to find you in there. The other one leads to the tactics room, reserved for times of war. When, if, you ever prove yourself to my satisfaction, I might invite you to join me there. That day is years away, so consider this single magnificent hall. He swept his arm out in a wide arc. Your home. Drizzt looked around, not overly thrilled. He had dared to hope that he had left this kind of treatment behind him with his page prince days. This setup, though, brought him back even to before his 6 years of servitude in the house, back to that decade when he had been locked away in the family chapel with Vierne. This room wasn't even as large as the chapel, and was too tight for the likings of the spirited young drow. His next question came out as a growl. Where do I sleep? Your home, Zack answered matter-of-factly. Where do I take meals? Your home. Drizzt's eyes narrowed to slits, and his face flushed in glowing heat. Where do I... he began stubbornly, determined to foil the weapons master's logic. "Your home," Zack replied in the same measured and weighted timbre before Drizzt could finish the thought. Drizzt planted his feet firmly and crossed his arms over his chest. "It sounds messy," he growled. "It had better not be," Zack growled back. "Then what is the purpose?" Drizzt began. "You pull me away from my mother. You will address her as Matron Malice," Zack warned. "You will always address her as Matron Malice." "From my mother." Zack's next interruption came not with words, but with the swing of a curled fist. Drizzt awoke about 20 minutes later. "First lesson," Zack explained, casually leaning against the wall a few feet away. "For your own good, you will always address her as Matron Malice." Drizzt rolled to his side and tried to prop himself up on his elbow, but found his head reeling as soon as it left the black-rugged floor. Zack grabbed him and hoisted him up. "Not as easy as catching coins," the weapons master remarked. "What? Parrying a blow?" "What blow?" "Just agree, you stubborn child." "Second boy," Drizzt corrected, his voice again a growl, and his arms defiantly back over his chest. Zack's fist curled at his side, a not-too-subtle point that Drizzt did not miss. "You need another nap?" the weapons master asked calmly. "Second boys can be children," Drizzt wisely conceded. Zack shook his head in disbelief. This was going to be interesting. "You may find your time here enjoyable," he said, leading Drizzt over to a long, thick, and colorfully, though most of the colors were somber, decorated curtain. "But only if you can learn some control over that wagging tongue of yours." A sharp tug sent the curtain floating down, revealing the most magnificent weapons rack the young drow, and many older drow as well, had ever seen. Polearms of many sorts, swords, axes, hammers, and every other kind of weapon Drizzt could imagine, and a whole bunch he'd never imagined, sat in an elaborate array. "Examine them," Zack told him. "Take your time and your pleasure. Learn which ones sit best in your hands. Follow most obediently the commands of your will. By the time we have finished, you will know every one of them as a trusted companion." Wide-eyed, Drizzt wandered along the rack, viewing the whole place and the potential of the whole experience in a completely different light. For his entire young life, 16 years, his greatest enemy had been boredom. Now it appeared, Drizzt had found weapons to fight that enemy. Zack headed for the door to his private chamber, thinking it better that Drizzt be alone in those first awkward moments of handling new weapons. The weapons master stopped, though, when he reached his door, and looked back to the young Do'Urden. Drizzt swung a long and heavy halberd, a polearm more than twice his height, in a slow arc. For all of Drizzt's attempts to keep the weapon under control, its momentum spun his tiny frame right to the ground. Zack heard himself chuckle, but his laughter only reminded him of the grim reality of his duty. He would train Drizzt, as he had trained 1,000 young dark elves before him, to be a warrior, preparing him for the trials of the academy and life in dangerous Menzoberranzan. He would train Drizzt to be a killer. How against this one's nature that mantle seemed, thought Zack. Smiles came too easily to Drizzt. The thought of him running a sword through the heart of another living being revolted Zack to faith. That was the way of the drow, though, a way that Zack had been unable to resist for all of his 4 centuries of life. Pulling his stare from the spectacle of Drizzt at play, Zack moved into his chamber and shut the door. "Are they all like that?" he asked into his nearly empty room. "Do all drow children possess such innocence, such simple, untainted smiles that cannot survive the ugliness of our world?" Zack started for the small desk to the side of the room, meaning to lift the darkening shade off the continually glowing ceramic globe that served as the chamber's light source. He changed his mind as that image of Drizzt's delight with the weapons refused to diminish, and he headed instead for the large bed across from the door. "Or are you unique, Drizzt Do'Urden?" he continued as he fell onto the cushioned bed. "And if you are so different, What then is the cause? The blood? My blood that courses through your veins? Or the years you spent with your wean mother? Zack threw an arm across his eyes and considered the many questions. Drizzt was different from the norm, he decided at length, but he didn't know whether he should thank Lierna or himself. After a while, sleep took him, but it brought the weapons master little comfort. A familiar dream visited him, a vivid memory that would never fade. Zack Nefane heard again the screams of the children of House de Vere as the Doherty soldiers he himself had trained, slashed over. "This one is different," Zack cried, leaping up from his bed. He wiped the cold sweat from his face. "This one is different." He had to believe that. 7. Dark Secrets. "Do you truly need to try?" Massage asked, his voice condescending and filled with disbelief. Alton turned his hideous glare on the student. "Direct your anger elsewhere, faceless one," Massage said, averting his gaze from his mentor's scarred visage. "I am not the cause of your frustration. The question was valid. For more than a decade, you have been a student of the magical arts," Alton replied. "Still you fear to explore the netherworld of the side of a master of Sorceia." "I would have no fear beside a true master," Massage dared to whisper. Alton ignored the comment, as he had with so many others he had accepted from the apprenticing Hunnet over the last 16 years. Massage was Alton's only tie to the outside world,
More like this
and while
one, just a
Massage had a
second.
powerful family, Alton had only Massage. They moved through the door into the uppermost chamber of Alton's 4-room complex. A single candle burned there, its light diminished by an abundance of dark-colored tapestries and the black hue of the room's stone and rugs. Alton slid onto his stool at the back of the small circular table and placed a heavy book down before him. "It is a better spell left for clerics," Massage protested, sitting down across from the faceless master. "Wizards command the lower planes. The dead are for the clerics alone." Alton looked around curiously, then turned a frown up at Massage, the master's grotesque features enhanced by the dancing candlelight. "It seems that I have no cleric at my call," the faceless one explained sarcastically. "Would you rather I try for another denizen of the 9 hells?" Massage rocked back in his chair and shook his head helplessly and emphatically. Alton had a point. A year before, the Faceless One had sought answers to his questions by enlisting the aid of an ice devil. The volatile thing froze the room until it shone black in the infrared spectrum and smashed a matron mother's treasure hoard worth of alchemical equipment. If Massage hadn't summoned his magical cat to distract the ice devil, neither he nor Alton would have gotten out of the room alive. "Very well, then," Massage said unconvincingly, crossing his arms in front of him on the table. "Conjure your spirit and find your answers." Alton did not dismiss the involuntary shudder belied by the ripple in Massage's robes. He glared at the student for a moment, then went back to his preparations. As Alton neared the time of casting, Massage's hand instinctively went into his pocket to the onyx figurine of the hunting cat he had acquired on the day Alton had assumed the Faceless One's identity. The little statue was enchanted with a powerful Dweomer that enabled its possessor to summon a mighty panther to his side. Massage had used the cat sparingly, not yet fully understanding the Dweomer's limitations and potential dangers. Only in times of need, Massage reminded himself quietly, when he felt the item in his hand. Why was it that those times kept occurring when he was with Alton? The apprentice wondered. Despite his bravado, this time Alton privately shared Massage's trepidation. Spirits of the dead were not as destructive as denizens of the lower planes, but they could be equally cruel and subtler in their torments. Alton needed his answer, though. For more than a decade and a half, he had sought his information through conventional channels, inquiring of masters and students, in a roundabout manner, of course, of the details concerning the fall of House de Vere. Many knew the rumors of that eventful night, Some even detailed the battle methods used by the victorious house. None, though, would name that perpetrating house. In Menzoberranzan, one did not utter anything resembling an accusation, even if the belief was commonly shared, without enough undeniable proof to spur the ruling council into a unified action against the accused. If a house botched a raid and was discovered, the wrath of all Menzoberranzan would descend upon it until the family name had been extinguished. But in the case of a successfully executed attack, such as the one that felled House de Vere, an accuser was the one most likely to wind up at the wrong end of a snake-headed whip. Public embarrassment, perhaps more than any guidelines of honor, turned the wheels of justice in the city of Drow. Alton now sought other means for the solution to his quest. First he had tried the lower planes, the Ice Devil, to disastrous effect. Now Alton had in his possession an item that could end his frustrations. A tome penned by a wizard of the surface world. In the Drow hierarchy, only the clerics of Lolth dealt with the realm of the dead. But in other societies, wizards also dabbled into the spirit world. Alton had found the book in the library of Sorcerre, and had managed to translate enough of it, he believed, to make a spiritual contact. He wrung his hands together, gingerly opened the book to the marked page, and scanned the incantation one final time. "Are you ready?" he asked Massage. "No." Alton ignored the student's unending sarcasm and placed his hands flat on the table. He slowly sunk into his deepest meditative trance. "Fey Inat." He paused and cleared his throat at the slip. Massage, though he hadn't closely examined the spell, recognized the mistake. "Fey Inunad de Min." Another pause. "Lolth be with us," Massage groaned under his breath. Alton's eyes popped wide and he glared at the student. "A translation," he growled, "from the strange language of a human wizard." "Gibberish," Massage retorted. "I have in front of me the private spell book of a wizard from the surface world," Alton said evenly. "An archmage, according to the scribbling of the Orcan thief who stole it and sold it to our agents." He composed himself again and shook his hairless head, trying to return to the depths of his trance. "A simple, stupid orc managed to steal a spell book from an archmage," Massage whispered rhetorically, letting the absurdity of the statement speak for itself. "The wizard was dead," Alton roared. "The book is authentic." "Who translated it?" Massage replied calmly. Alton refused to listen to any more arguments. Ignoring the smug look on Massage's face, he began again. "Fey Inunad, de Min, de Sul de Ket." Massage faded out and tried to rehearse a lesson from one of his classes, hoping that his sobs of laughter wouldn't disturb Alton. He didn't believe for a moment that Alton's attempt would prove successful, but he didn't want to screw up the fool's line of babbling again and have to suffer through the ridiculous incantation still another time. A short time later, when Massage heard Alton's excited whisper, "Matron Jennifer," he quickly focused his attention back on the events at hand. Sure enough, an unusual ball of green-hued smoke appeared over the candle's flame and gradually took a more definite shape. "Matron Jennifer," Alton gasped again when the summons was complete. Hovering before him was the unmistakable image of his dead mother's face. The spirit scanned the room, confused. "Who are you?" it asked at length. "I am Alton. Alton de Vere, your son." "Son?" the spirit asked. "Your child. I remember no child so very ugly." "A disguise," Alton replied quickly, looking back at Massage and expecting a snicker. If Massage had chided and doubted Alton before, he now showed only sincere respect. Smiling, Alton continued, "Just a disguise, that I might move about in the city and exact revenge upon our enemies." "What city?" "Menzoberranzan, of course." Still the spirit seemed not to understand. "You are Jennifer?" Alton pressed. "Matron Jennifer de Vere?" The spirit's features contorted into a twisted scowl as he considered the question. "I was, I think." Matron mother of House de Vere, fourth house of Menzel Baronzon, Alton prompted, growing more excited. I'm priestess of love. The mention of the Spider Queen sent a spark through the spirit. Oh no, it bawled. Jennifer remembered now. You should not have done this, my ugly son. It is just a disguise, Alton interrupted. I must leave you. Jennifer's spirit continued, glancing around nervously. You must release me. But I need some information from you, Matron Jennifer. Do not call me that, the spirit shrieked. You do not understand. I am not in Lolth's favor. Trouble, whispered Massage offhandedly, hardly surprised. Just one answer, Alton demanded, refusing to let another opportunity to learn his enemy's identity slip past him. Quickly, the spirit shrieked. Name the house that destroyed de Vere. The house? Jennifer pondered. Yes, I remember that evil night. It was house. A ball of smoke puffed and bent out of shape, twisting Jennifer's image and sending her next words out as an indecipherable blur. Alton leaped to his feet. No, he screamed. You must tell me. Who are my enemies? Would you count me as one? The spirit image said, in a voice very different from the one it had used earlier. A tone of sheer power that stole the blood from Alton's face. The image twisted and transformed, became something ugly, uglier than Alton, hideous beyond all experience on the material plane. Alton was not a cleric, of course, and he had never studied the Drow religion beyond the basic tenets taught to males of the race. He knew the creature now hovering in the air before him, though, for it appeared as an oozing, slimy stick of melted wax. A Yoclo, a handmaiden of love. You dare to disturb the torment of Jennifer? The Yoclo snarled. Damn, whispered Massage, sliding slowly down under the black tablecloth. Even he, with all of his doubts of Alton, had not expected his disfigured mentor to land him in trouble this serious. But, Alton stuttered, never again disturb this plane, feeble wizard, the Yoclo roared. I did not try for the abyss, Alton protested meekly. I only meant to speak with Jennifer, the Yoclo snarled. Fallen priestess of love. Where would you expect to find her spirit, foolish male? Frolicking in Olympus with the false gods of the surface elves? I did not think. Do you ever? The Yoclo growled. Nope, Massage answered silently, careful to keep himself as far out of the way as possible. Never again disturb this plane, the Yoclo warned a final time. The Spider Queen is not merciful and has no tolerance for meddling males. The creature's oozing face puffed and swelled, expanding beyond the limits of the smoky ball. Alton heard gurgling, gagging noises, and he stumbled back over his stool, putting his back flat against the wall and bringing his arms up defensively in front of his face. The Yoclo's mouth opened impossibly wide and spewed forth a hail of small objects. They ricocheted off Alton and tapped against the wall all around him. Stones? The faceless wizard wondered in confusion. One of the objects then answered his unspoken question. It caught hold of Alton's layered black robes and began crawling up toward his exposed neck. Spiders. A wave of the eight-legged beasts rushed under the little table, sending Massage tumbling out the other side in a desperate roll. He scrambled to his feet and turned back to see Alton slapping and stomping wildly, trying to get out of the main host of the crawling things. Do not kill them, Massage screamed. To kill spiders is forbidden by to the nine hells with the clerics and their laws, Alton shrieked back. Massage shrugged in helpless agreement, reached around under the folds of his own robes, and produced the same two-handed crossbow he had used to kill the faceless one those years ago. He considered the powerful weapon and the tiny spiders scrambling around the room. Overkill? He asked aloud. Hearing no answer, he shrugged again and fired. The heavy bolt knifed across Alton's shoulder, cutting a deep line. The wizard stared in disbelief, then turned an ugly grimace on Massage. You had one on your shoulder, the student explained. Alton's scowl did not relent. Ungrateful? Massage snarled. Foolish Alton, all of the spiders are on your side of the room, remember? Massage turned to leave and called, Good hunting! over his shoulder. He reached for the handle to the door, but as his long fingers closed around it, the portal's surface transformed into the image of Matron Ginefay. She smiled widely, too widely, and an impossibly long and wet tongue reached out and licked Massage across the face. "Alton!" he cried, spinning back against the wall, out of the slimy member's reach. He noticed the wizard in the midst of spellcasting, Alton fighting to hold his concentration as a host of spiders continued their hungry ascent up his flowing robes. "You are a dead one," Massage commented matter-of-factly, shaking his head. Alton fought through the exacting ritual of the spell, ignored his own revulsion of the crawling things, and forced the evocation to completion. In all of his years of study, Alton never would have believed he could do such a thing. He would have laughed at the mere mention of it. Now, however, it seemed a far preferable fate to the Yochlol's creeping doom. He dropped the fireball at his own feet. Naked and hairless, Massage stumbled through the door and out of the inferno. The flaming, faceless master came next, diving into a roll and stripping his tattered and burning robe from his back as he went. As he watched Alton patting out the last of the flames, a pleasant memory flashed in Massage's mind, and he uttered the single lament that dominated his every thought of this disastrous moment. "I should have killed him when I had him in the web." A short time later, after Massage had gone back to his room and his studies, Alton slipped on the ornamental metallic bracers that identified him as a master of the academy and slipped outside the structure of Sorcerre. He moved to the wide and sweeping stairway leading down from Tir Bresh and sat down to take in the sights of Menzoberranzan. Even with this view, though, the city did little to distract Alton from thoughts of his latest failure. For 16 years he had forsaken all other dreams and ambitions in his desperate search to find the guilty house. For 16 years he had failed. He wondered how long he could keep up the charade and his spirits. Massage, his only friend, if Massage could be called a friend, was more than halfway through his studies at Sorcerre. What would Alton do when Massage graduated and returned to House Hanmet? "Perhaps I shall carry on my toils for centuries to come," he said aloud, "only to be murdered by a desperate student, as Massage murdered the faceless one. Might that student disfigure himself and take my place?" Alton couldn't stop the ironic chuckle that passed his lipless mouth at the notion of a perpetual, faceless master of Sorcerre.
Excuse me. Okay, everyone. It's going to be an early one tonight. I want to thank everyone for stopping by. Everyone keeps coming by. Sorry, I got a call at an early one tonight, but my back's hurting me, so and I don't feel too good. But I should be doing better tomorrow, and hopefully be able to get started on some Conan books. But once again for stopping by, and everyone keeps stopping by. I appreciate all y'all's support. Until next time, everyone, y'all stay safe.